Mark 1:7 is again pretty straightforward, although you do have an interesting relative clause here. Kai ekerusin legon, erketai ha escuratorasmu, opisomu, hu uk emi hikanas, kupsas, lusai tan himanta ton hupodematon autu. And he was saying, he was proclaiming, remember this is John the Baptist. It's interesting, we've had two different paraphrastic constructions in the previous verse, and here Mark switches to a regular indicative, probably no real difference in meaning. But he was proclaiming, saying, and you'll see in the footnotes of the graded reader that legon is classified as what's called a redundant participle. You don't really need it in English, but it's a very, very common construction in Greek where you have an indicative verb followed by a participle. And that he was crying out saying, and then here's your verb, comes, and then you have the subject, the one greater than I. Now, there's all kinds of things going on in this construction. The teros is the way that you turn an adjective into a comparative adjective. Their adjectives have degrees, like big, bigger, biggest in English. So be sure you check the footnote in the graded reader for that whole discussion. But it also is always followed by a genitive. The genitive is technically called the genitive of comparison. We've already looked at that. But it's the one who is greater than mu, which is greater than I. You wouldn't say greater than me. You'd say greater than I, at least in English. So the one greater than I comes after me. And then you hit this relative clause, of whom I am not worthy, stooping down. Then you have your complementary infinitive, I'm not worthy to loose the strap of his sandals. By the way, before I forget, back on mu, you see there's no accent. This is technically called an enclitic. It's a word that is pronounced so closely with the preceding word that it loses its accent backwards. That's why there's two accent marks on escuratoros. The other thing that I want to mention is this participle. One is that aorist participles are used to describe an action occurring immediately before the main verb. So I am not worthy to loosen. Well, what do you do before you loosen? You stoop down so you can loosen. So one function, like I said, of an aorist participle is to indicate an action occurring prior to the main verb, emi loosai. There also is a category of aorist participles called immediate past. In other words, this happens right before this happens. So there's several different ways to explain it, but you stoop down and then you loosen. The phrasing is pretty interesting here. So do there, get your relative clause in its own line. And so here's what he's saying. So we're going to run out of space here, but this is what he says, that there's a greater than I is coming after me. So there's your subject, right? One greater than I is coming after me. And then he's going to talk about this relative clause. And so I got to put some extra space in there, and I'll pull it in a little. And where, as you always do, you always connect relative pronouns to their antecedent, and the antecedent of who is, it's the one who's greater, of whom I am not worthy. So then you set out the relative clause this way, and this is just to keep everything on the same line. You could do something like that. I don't know if it's necessary, but So he cried out, saying, one greater than I is coming after me. And then relative to that greater one, I am not worthy to stoop down and untie. Is probably how you do it in proper English. You stoop down, bend over, and untie the strap. What strap? Well, the strap of his sandals. If you really wanted to, you could take hoopsas and put it under lucci, but I don't think it's really helpful in terms of meaning.